can hear you. Good evening, everybody. I can hear you. Welcome. Oh, hang on. We have a problem. Good evening, everybody. There you go. Sorry, I had a bit of a problem there. Good evening, everybody. You are very, very welcome to this Finding Home event. My name is Krish Kandiah, and I'm the founder of the Sanctuary Foundation. And our event tonight is looking at a really important but sometimes tricky conversation about how we stand with our Ukrainian guests and help them transition when they need to independent accommodation. And we're going to look at that at lots and lots of different levels. I'm excited to tell you in a few moments, we're going to be hearing from Lord Harrington, who's the Minister for Refugees. He's going to be talking a little bit about the overview of what's happening right now. We're going to hear from Tanya Orlova, who is a trauma expert and also a refugee herself. And she's going to guide us through how we have those sometimes difficult conversations about moving on and finding new accommodation. We've got Ben Beadle, who's the CEO of the National Residential Landlords Association, and he'll help us understand what we should expect from landlords. And then finally, we've got Caroline, who's a director at the Department for Levelling Up and Communities, and she's going to help us understand what the policy is around accommodation. Now, for the first time ever at one of our events, we're going to try and broadcast a live stream in Ukrainian. So hopefully that means you could be sat together with your host and your guest right now. And if you click the link, should be in the chat, you can be hearing me speak in Ukrainian. That's thanks to some lovely friends of ours, Tanya and Maria, who are live broadcasting, live translating, which is a superpower. And so I am going to try and speak slowly. And so are our guests. We're going to try and slow down to give our live translation team a chance to keep up. And it's amazing. I don't know how anyone is able to listen to something, translate it in their head, speak it out, and then listen to the next thing coming. So really, really grateful to Tanya and Maria for making that possible. But it could mean that you're both sat next to each other, both the guest and the host, watching this broadcast, and one of you has headphones in and you're listening to the Ukrainian stream, or the other way around. We're going to try it out, and hopefully it will work. And we're a small charity, but we're just doing the best we can to try and be as inclusive as possible. Now, before we go anywhere, can I just say well done? I don't know if you know this, but you have made history. If you are a guest, you are really welcome here. We're delighted that you're here in the UK. But if you're a host, you have broken a record in British history. There are now over 100,000 Ukrainians that have come to the UK. And according to the government's figures, over 70,000 are living with people like you and me. We are hosting in our homes. And that hasn't happened at this scale since 1945. And this is absolutely amazing. It's a game changer. It could well be a global game changer. I don't know if you've worked out from the clock behind me, but I am in the United States. And I've been having conversations with refugee resettlement charities, and they are astounded what our little island has been able to do. I know there are controversial times afoot with our general immigration policy, but I think there's something to celebrate right now in what we're doing in working with our friends from Ukraine and offering them somewhere safe to live. So you are record breakers, you're doing something amazing. And even though this is going to be quite a complex and difficult conversation, I want you to see the big picture. Something historic is taking place and you are part of it. So thank you very much. Great. So I want to introduce you to my first guest, and that is Lord Harrington, Richard Harrington. He sometimes likes to be called Richard, and he wanted to be with us tonight, but had a last-minute ministerial duty. I'm a big fan of his. I think he does a great job. You don't have to support any particular party to recognise that someone really is doing it out of a sense of duty and passion. I find that in Richard. So over to Richard, and we'll talk together on the other side.
Well, Lord Harrington, Richard, thank you so much for joining us. Again, love your passion for helping the Ukrainian people find somewhere safe to live in the UK. On this call today, we've got lots of hosts who are excited, frustrated, challenged, a whole range of emotions. And some of them would love to hear, I guess, your heartbeat for the next phase of this incredible program, because some people are coming up to about 4 months of having hosted. What is it that you'd like to say to our hosts as they're listening in tonight?
Well, the main thing I'd like to say, Krish, is thank you very, very much. And I'm writing, in fact, you should get it this week to everyone with myself and the Ukrainian ambassador, basically to say that we should say to ourselves as a country for people to do what has been done in the line of such tragedy. It's the least we could do, but I'm very grateful to everyone that's done it. And pleased to say the number now is in excess of 100,000 Ukrainians in total that have come over here. To our friends from Ukraine, Chris, who are, I know many of them are on the call, you're very, very welcome. All of us feel that, all of us that are involved in any way. I changed my life, as Krish knows, to do this job, which I'm proud to have had the opportunity to do it. For me, it's in my blood because 3 of my 4 grandparents came from, well, Russia and the Ukraine. And I just feel like with everybody, we can't help you as you really want us to help you, which is to defend you directly from what's happened. So we all do what we can do. And for British people who have not done this sponsorship before, we did a limited number of 600 people with the Syrian ones, Krish, which you'll remember, which was very good. But this is on a much greater scale. So thank you, everybody, and feel really welcome to our Ukrainian friends on this call, because you are.
That's so encouraging. And it is history in the making. Over 100,000 people. That's not been something that we've done as a country since 1945. So, you know, fantastic work.
Yeah,
but
it's
something
interesting,
of this...
Krish, you know, when no one was coming and the papers were full of it, you know, we were all on it and criticised. Now it's 100,000, it barely gets a mention.
I know. Well, we know, and all our guests and hosts know, so it's fantastic work. But something of that scale doesn't come without, I guess, challenges and frustrations. And one of the big worries people have are about housing beyond the 6 months. And I know, you know, it's an emergency context, it's an evacuation, but what hope can you give to some of our callers tonight as they think about life beyond hosting?
Well, first of all, the letter that we're writing to people, we're contacting people as they come up to 4 months to remind them that the initial commitment was 6 months and to ask them if they are in a position to renew. And from the surveys, etc., that we've done, the research, we think the majority of people will want to. Obviously, there's no compulsion, and certainly there's no moral or legal or contractual compulsion whatsoever. And I'm very grateful for people that have done it for 6 months, but we would ask you to extend, if possible, for another 6 months. And it's my job to make sure that the government has the financial provision with the thank you payment and supporting the local authorities, etc., to do that. But I know it's not easy. And for some people, they won't be able to do that, which we perfectly understand. And then it's our job to try and rematch people into other houses, hopefully as near as possible to where they are. Where we have new hosts who will be wanting to take them in. In addition, stop me if I'm going on too much, Krish.
No, it's good.
Friends and everyone's listening. I know it's not like a formal thing, this, but the other thing that I'm hoping is that more people, as they come into employment, will move into the private rental sector. And I've had meetings with most of the the National Landlords Association, groups like that, so I know you speak to yourself, Krish, to talk to them how to make it easier for our Ukrainian friends.
That's brilliant. We'll be digging into that a little bit later, and you'll know some of the challenges that people have when they've just arrived in the country, providing those kind of bank details and pay slips over a number of months. Are you seeing some good innovation in that space?
Well, yes, we're trying to get round the computer says no, because normally if you're just a private landlord, remember most landlords in this country have got 1 or 2 buy-to-lets. It's usually their pension or something like that. It's not like an insurance company that's got 10,000. The agent properly does credit checks. You know, have they got a bank account? Have they got employment record? Have they got this, which people from Ukraine don't have? Well, some landlords will say, well, I'm very sorry, but I can't afford to take the risk. I don't want you, not because you're Ukrainian, but because, you know, it's part of their income for their pension, etc. But I feel many, if asked, and say, well, these people haven't quite got the references because they've not been here that long, but they, you know, they got a good job or whatever. I'm sure a lot of people will be very happy to take people like that. Remember, a lot of our Ukrainian guests have got jobs and have got good jobs. It's just simply they don't have the record because they've only been here for a few months. So it's our job to try and, well, and I must say, with the support of many people, many of the professional bodies and others that represent landlords, to basically overcome this. But of course, no one can force anyone to do it. And you know, it's a bit like people who are sponsors. Some people will and some people won't. It doesn't mean one's a goodie and one's a baddie. It's just, you know, there's different circumstances.
That's really helpful. And I think that's part of our call tonight, is to try and find innovative solutions. It would be great if some of the people that have made friends in an area, their children are in a local school, can stay where they've arrived. That isn't always going to be possible, but that would be the ideal that we'll try and make possible, because it will just help children to flourish. Less another trauma they don't have to go through, having to move and then, you know, make new friends again. So
exactly.
I think we're all on the same page.
I'd also like to point out that we are also we are, if you like, they don't call it that these days, but advertising, if you like, to get new sponsors as well. And we should be looking particularly for them in areas where there are existing sponsors, because for the reasons that you said. I mean, when I met you in Henley quite recently, there were people, everyone there was within an area. I mean, some were in the town of Henley, but in the villages and smaller places around. And I'm sure there are other people who might not have answered the call for arms at the first instance, but might say, actually, well, I think I could do that.
I think you're right. We've been involved personally with a re-sponsoring situation, and it does seem to work very well. Again, ideally, we'll help people to get into homes of their own, but I think in the interim, that is going to be the way that things need to go forward. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Richard. We really appreciate what you're doing and just love your collaborative spirit. We're keen to make this work as best we can as civil society, churches, individuals around the country, just doing our bit. And we feel part of a team with you. So thanks for being part of this event tonight.
Absolute pleasure, Krish, and see you soon. Bye.
Amazing. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you to Lord Harrington. I guess watching the chat, we are still having some problems with the Ukrainian feed. We're working on that as quickly as possible. Yes, this is being recorded, including the version in Ukrainian, so you can come back and watch it from the beginning when that's available. And I guess we need to recognize that lots of our guests are coming from very, very different circumstances. I've met Ukrainians whose English is better than mine. I've also met Ukrainians who are struggling to even put a few words together. So we've got a real range. And I guess your experiences really matter. We want to hear from you, but we can't assume that everyone has the same experience as you do. And it is true. I've met Ukrainians that are carrying on doing the same jobs they were doing back in Ukraine. I've met others that have found new jobs and others that have really struggled. So we've got a real range of people, and that's only to be expected with 100,000 Ukrainians in the country. The system is not working as well as we would like, but in an evacuation, sometimes things have to, it's an emergency. It's not perfect. And my job here is to try and help all of us do as best we can. So thanks for being part of it. Thanks for commenting. And we are working on all those different aspects. Now, I am delighted that we get to hear from someone who has lived experience. Tanya Orlova has personal experience of coming to the UK as a refugee, but she's also a trauma expert. And so we're going to have a little conversation now together about how to have that difficult conversation. Tanya, welcome. Thanks for joining us. You look wonderful in the garden.
Yeah, hi, Krish. Thank you for inviting me. It's really an honor for me to speak here, because I'm having this kind of conversations and this kind of thoughts all the time, and it's really wonderful what you are doing. You are inviting experts, and I believe that would really forward things about housing. So I want to introduce myself. My name is Tanya Orlova. I'm a refugee myself. I came to UK a little more than 3 months ago with my son. He's 8 years old, and with my mom, and we live with a family. We have our hosts, and for us they are best ever host in the world, of course, and we have great I feel that we understand each other, and we built a good routine. So I like the situation I have now. At the same time, I want to tell you that myself, I feel a little bit weird when I'm thinking that I should come and start the conversation about what are we going to do after 6 months, maybe 12 months. Actually, it matters, but not really much, so to say, because we have to understand what to do in the future. And we know all that we have to find a solution, we have to find a place where to live. And so
Tanya,
yeah.
can I just ask you a quick question? Because we're
Yeah.
struggling a little bit with the translation, it's not working. I wonder if you could greet our Ukrainian friends in Ukrainian. Apologize, we
Absolutely.
haven't done the translation ready. I think they would just love to hear something in their language. Thank you.
Yeah. Would you like me to speak both Ukrainian and English?
Oh, wow.
Or
Well, just for a little while.
okay, so I'll say it in Ukrainian what I just said in English. Добрий вечір. Я з України, і моє ім'я Тетяна Орлова. Я розумію, тут невеличка технічний момент з тим, щоб перекладати те, що я кажу, тому я розкажу вам українською. Я сама приїхала 3 місяці тому в Британію. Я з Києва, я приїхала зі своїм сином, якому 8 років, з моєю мамою. Ми поселилися так само, як і більшість українців. Ми живемо з сім'єю, і вони просто чудові. Я пишаюся тим, що я з ними. Вони допомагають нам всім дуже багато. А разом з тим я хочу сказати, що я ще сама не почала цю розмову про те, що буде через 6 місяців або через 12 місяців.
It's working. Oh, now we've lost you. That's funny.
Дуже швидко. Час іде дуже швидко, і ми просто можемо це не помітити, як вже треба щось вирішувати. А вирішувати треба, ми всі це розуміємо. І тому я хочу сказати, що тут дуже важливий момент є в тому, щоб розпочати оцю розмову якомога скоріше. Я ще хочу сказати, що я працюю в Community Impact Box. Це така благодійна організація в Buckinghamshire. І тому що я працюю з цією організацією, я дуже багато спілкуюся з ком'юнітіс, які допомагають українцям. І я знаю, що оця ситуація, яка є у нас зараз, і оце питання про те, що буде після 6 місяців, це питання там, воно входить в топ-3.
Yes? We've got the Ukrainian stream working. Hooray!
Okay, great. So I can go on with English?
Yes, but let me make an announcement first. So if you are listening in the Ukrainian stream, we will be able to send you the recording of what you have missed. But we're just going to carry on now, and you'll be able to hear in English on this channel and in Ukrainian on the other channel. And we're very grateful for the technical team helping us in the background when we had that issue. But Tanya, please just help us figure out how English people can have a good conversation with their Ukrainian guests about accommodation without sounding rude or not wanting to look after people? And is there any advice of what we could practically do to have that difficult conversation together? Over to you.
Yes, of course. Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying, and I was saying that I'm working now as a project manager in community impact box, and I see that most of the communities are discussing this issue, and they understand that it's very difficult, and they are trying to find out what to do about this issue, and of course. That's understandable, that it's very difficult, a very awkward situation, and that's what I was hearing from other sponsors, because I'm also talking to them a lot, and they say that that's an issue that makes them wake up in the middle of the night of thinking it. So really that's anyhow very difficult issue, because from one side you understand that these people, Ukrainians, they came from a very difficult they having war in their country, and that's very a very unpleasant experience, if you can say so. And it's very harsh. It's very harsh for them. At the same time, you are a human being, and maybe you feel like you made what you could. You gave your hospitality for 6 months, and then you couldn't do it anymore, and it doesn't matter what kind of reason you have. You can feel like that, you can have other reasons. You are a human being, right? You are not robots that can behave a certain way. So that's absolutely normal, that from one side you feel that it's really difficult, and from another side you are maybe not ready to make it longer. So if you feel that you are fine for your guests to stay, that's hurrah. Just tell them about it, so that they can understand that they can stay there longer. And if you don't feel like that, again, try to speak with your
I've lost Tanya. Maybe you have too. We're having
don't try to do you hear me? Sorry. Don't try to postpone it. Try to speak about it as soon as you understood it. And before that, what I would really recommend doing for both sides, for hosts and for guests, I would recommend you to sit and have a piece of paper and put both difficulties you could face, and also benefits you could have from Ukrainian family living independently, because maybe many Ukrainians don't realize it now, but from what I'm hearing from Ukrainian, it's of course a little bit difficult, sometimes really difficult, when you have all the time think how to behave, when should you come back home, are you doing everything fine, all the time kind of look back and ask, is it fine, can I do this, can I do that? That's tiring. And if you are able to find your home, to be independent, that's really fantastic. And I'm starting seeing in these chats a conversation about those that people are finding their homes, and they're sharing their experience, and everybody is so exciting about it. So that's really important for Ukrainian people. So first, make your decision. Second, make this list. Nothing is good or bad. Again, what I want to say that war is really bad. You know. So then third thing, what you could do is when you've done this list, when you have it, talk about this issue maybe with somebody else so that you have a second opinion about this kind of things. That's always great. That always would help you to understand certain things from other person opinion, right? And then the third thing, start acting. Really, when you understand that this is the situation, if you are a sponsor, maybe you could support your guests, maybe you could help finding agencies, maybe you could help finding information about it, maybe you could help just to sit together and make this other list of steps, what you could do, where you can start from, and you can do it together. Same for Ukrainian guests. You have your information from other sites. You can always double check it. You can always ask things, and you can always start acting. That's very important, starting acting, because that's converting you from being a victim, right, to being a doer, being a winner. And we want to be winners, we don't want to be victims. That's a very important thing. So, well, that's,
I really like the idea you had where, if we're shy or struggling to have that direct conversation, I really like the idea that you would have, you would make a list of what you wanted to talk about as the host, and you'd get your guest to have a list, and that would facilitate the conversation for those of us that might be worried a little bit about the cultural differences, about being rude or impolite. But if you can, that tool seemed like a really good idea. So thank you very much for giving us that. And this idea of working with our refugees rather than doing to them, so that they don't come across as a victim, I think that's a really good idea, isn't it? That we give them agency. I've met many people who are hosting, who've never done it before, no experience, no training in working with people with trauma. And one of the things is we tend to take over and start doing everything for everybody, infantilizing, that's a horrible word, treating a refugee like a child rather than an adult. And that's why, we made a little training course to help people think through some of those issues together. So thank you very much, Tanya. Was there any last thing you wanted to say before we speak to Ben from the National Residential Landlords Association?
I think that those things I wanted to say, and I want to say in Ukrainian for the guests. Слава Україні, ми переможемо, і разом ми сила. Давайте триматися разом, і ми все подолаємо. Я абсолютно в цьому впевнена. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
Slava Ukraine. Thank you, Tanya. Stick around. There's going to be a chance for people to ask questions of you later, and really appreciate you and all that you're doing. Thank you. Now, again, watching the comments, thank you for them. I guess we'd encourage you to be constructive and helpful. I can see from some of you, you're very upset about how things are going, and that's understandable. It's been a stressful situation, but maybe some of that angst and anger could actually compound a difficult situation for someone coming from Ukraine. If someone is experiencing trauma, if you've studied this, you will know that a calm environment is often helpful, and that's got to be difficult when the system isn't working. I'm familiar with that. I've been a foster carer for 16 years, and if you want to know about a broken system, look at foster care. But if we bring that angst and anger into our home, it actually makes it a lot more difficult for our children to thrive and flourish. So let's try and keep the comments nice and positive and encouraging. We've got all sorts of people here with all sorts of backgrounds, and your experience is valid and important, but it might not be what everyone is experiencing. So thank you. Now, a few of you have been struggling with already trying to find some private rental accommodation. And so who better to help us think about that than the head of the National Residential Landlords Association. So let's have Ben here. Ben, good to see you. Thanks for making time for us. We've worked together on the Afghan resettlement. And again, there are lots of things that are going wrong with the Ukrainian resettlement, but spare a thought for our Afghan friends. Many of them have been in temporary accommodation for a whole year. And, so we're recognizing we're not dealing with a perfect system, and we're all just trying to do the best we can. Ben, help us understand things from the private rental sector. If someone does need to move on or wants to move on and is trying to find accommodation locally, what should they expect from private landlords?
Well, Krish, first of all, thanks very much for the invitation to this. Really happy to address those people that are on the call, hosts or guests. And I think it's important. I've been looking at the comments actually, and I think there's a couple of things that stand out. One, I think it's really important for me to stress that the UK doesn't have a glut of rented housing that are sitting there waiting to be occupied, unfortunately. And so I think, I have to be honest with people to say that the private rented sector is facing increased demands in terms of housing people. So I wouldn't want people to leave this webinar thinking that it's going to, they probably worked it out for themselves, I'm sure, but there aren't enough homes to go around. That's the reality of the situation. But I think first and foremost, a conversation and communication between the host and the guest around what the plans are and what sort of practical things can your host do in terms of facilitating moving on into the private rented sector. Well, I think it depends on your circumstances. For those people that are maybe claiming universal credit, pension credits, those types of things, then a really good source for information will be the local authority. And I've seen a few comments here that we need some sort of national scheme to facilitate this. Well, we don't have one. We're reliant on local authorities executing this. And I know that my local authority in Hillingdon is putting on extra steps so that guests can get the right sort of advice in terms of transitioning. So a bit of advice from me is talk to your local authority if you fit into that bracket. The second thing is if you are perhaps not using universal credit or housing benefit, then making sure that you have an early conversation with an agent or a future landlord about your circumstances. Actually, as a landlord, I'm not fussed about your history. I appreciate that people would have been through a rotten time, but actually selling your prospects in terms of employment and job and salary, etc., will put most landlords' mind at rest. And I think, whether or not you use an agent or whether you go to a landlord directly, be really honest about your circumstances and sell yourself in the most positive way, because I'm afraid it is a competitive environment out there, as you well know, Krish. That we've got a shortage of homes for rent, and so positioning yourself in the most positive way possible with an upfront conversation with an agent or a landlord is definitely the way to go.
Thanks, Ben. A few comments in the chat are kind of upset with the whole system, and many of us would love to start again and say let's build a system from scratch. Let's get a government that has enough social housing for everybody. That's not the situation we're in, and many of us are having pretty upfront, direct conversations with the government. We're in the middle of a leadership change. So, are we going to see change happen very quickly? Who knows? So again, recognizing we're dealing with a flawed system. Some of those landlords are saying that they won't rent to someone who's on credit. They won't rent to someone who doesn't have any credit history. What do we do then? There has been a few comments about whether hosts should step up as guarantors. Can you do that if you're a pensioner? Lots of very practical questions. Is basically up to the landlord, or are there any national standards that we can kind of draw on?
Essentially, it's down to what the landlord will accept now. But just a couple of things in terms of the comments that you make, Krish. You know, host standing as guarantor would feel to me to be a very generous offer. That's all I'll say on the matter. I don't know. Really, government should be stepping in here and providing some sort of support, because I think, you know, although Richard's a very good chap, the reality is there isn't a formalised plan to move from guests into the private rented sector. Yeah, we'll have to be honest with people, there isn't one, and that's why they're asking for people to extend for another 6-month period. So in my view, there does need to be a national scheme that facilitates people moving from host environment to the private rented sector. But there are options. So a couple of things. One, no landlord should discriminate against people that are claiming universal credit or housing benefit. We're very clear about that. That's an unacceptable way to operate. We'd like to see the universal credit system improved for both landlords and tenants, but we are where we are, right? So let
me just ask you on that one. Sorry to interrupt you. If you do come across a landlord that is saying that, what practical thing can I do? Like, what recourse do I have if it's clear, or is it likely to be hidden? We just are not told about that. But let's say it is anyway. Let's say it's out in the open that they won't rent to us because we're on universal credit. What should we do?
Well, I think you could nicely point out to the landlord that there's precedents in courts across the land that say that that's discrimination. So I would be pointing that out. But the reality is, Krish, and I hate to keep harking back to it, the reality is probably the landlord's got 9 or 10 other tenants in the pot. And so we're in a very, very competitive market. I don't think that a landlord will come back and say, sorry, I'm not accepting you because you're on benefits. The reality is they would have chosen somebody else that meets their criteria. So we have a systemic issue in terms of the supply of properties. And folks, I'm really sorry about that, but that is literally how it is. So what I would say is that, you know, engage with your local authority, make sure that you know what your universal credit or your housing benefit or your pension credit is going to be. But landlords should be assessing people not on whether people are claiming benefits, but on the totality of what they bring to the party, if I put it in very crude terms. But if you are working, then I can see no real downside to not having credit history. People come from overseas all of the time. This is, I know we're in a particular situation here, but coming from overseas is what people do, right? If you've got the prospect of a job, secure employment and salary, well, frankly, the landlord would be absolutely bonkers to turn you down. And you can quote me on that. So I think it is about positioning people, positioning yourself as positively as you can. But one thing I would say, Krish, is landlords want to help. And we've seen this not just during the pandemic, but in the Afghan resettlement and in this. We've had people calling our advice line saying, how can I get my property to the people that need it, as quickly as possible. So there are some really good people out there, folks. There are some really good people out there. But ultimately, it's the landlord that decides who ends up in their property.
Yeah, that's so helpful. A few comments came back saying the agents aren't even showing people the property, so we never even get to the landlords. And another comment was some landlords, and look, again, there are good and bad landlords, right? And with you, I've met some amazing ones, so you can't just write all of them off. The comment was some landlords seem to be setting the rent just above the kind of housing benefit cap as another filter. Look, we recognise, again, we've said it over and over, this is not a perfect system. Things are broken. We're just trying to do the best we can. But any advice in those circumstances, particularly about the agents not showing people properties?
Yeah, I mean, that is a tricky one. And that's, I mean, we know from various surveys and national surveys that we've done that when people rent directly through a landlord, they actually have a better experience than if they go through an agent. I have nothing to offer other than persevering, I'm afraid. And if you feel that you've been treated unfairly, then that agent has to be a member of a redress scheme, and I would report them to the relevant redress scheme if they're not playing ball. But in terms of the local housing allowance, well, truth be told, Krish, that we are seeing rents rise. We're seeing rents rise a lot, and I think the reality is we've also got a freeze on local housing allowance at the same time. Yeah. So that means that the gap, in simple terms, between rents and what you get, if I get my hands on the screen, is getting bigger and bigger each year. And that is a political decision. So again, if you are short, you've got the option to be able to top it up. Obviously, it depends on your means, but you could also look at a guarantor, a UK-based guarantor, somebody that would guarantee the rent for you. And that would be an attractive proposition. To landlords, but I don't want to leave this without people thinking that landlords are heartless so-and-sos. Honestly, there's a lot of good people out there, folks, and I think persevere to get to the right ones. Yes, sometimes you have an agent in the way and you have to work a bit harder, but sell your prospects, get through to the landlord. And there's lots of support out there, so do engage your local authority, and I'm sure Krish, I and others will be pushing behind the scenes, because we recognise from the comments that there are imperfections with the scheme, and we do need to have a bit more of a streamlined movement into the private rented sector.
That's right, and I guess it's a double whammy. We want to be working constructively and yet robustly with government when things aren't working. But we need to recognise things haven't been working for quite a while, and not just for Ukrainians, also for Afghans and actually local people. There's a huge dearth of social housing across the UK, and it's why local councils are in a bit of a no-win situation. If they offer housing to Ukrainians or Afghans ahead of local people, then there's a big outcry, and it's hard for them to get elected. So you got that politics going on. So we are trying, and you need to hear this. Neither of us, Ben nor I, work for the government. We are trying to do our best. There are things you can do, and there's been a few comments about lobbying. I think there are ways that we can lobby that are offensive and in your face, and at the moment that doesn't seem to work well with this particular government. But if you can show a genuine problem and offer a solution, there was a really good one earlier in that local authorities acting as guarantors, that would be a really powerful way, and I've been advocating for that for a while. So I think if we can be constructive, we also need to be data driven. We're often collecting information, and we've got surveys out. We'll do another one soon. If you are hitting specific problems, let us know, because then we can be the eyes and ears that push things back up to government. Say, look, whatever your hopes are, this is the reality. We want to help you find a solution. So lobbying is one thing. I think the other thing is just being practically helpful on the ground and working with the system that is, as we try to change the system that should be. And a few people were saying, well, how could someone with bad English or broken English present themselves? I think that's where we come in as hosts. We can work alongside our Ukrainian friends, and we can help them. We can help be an advocate with them in order to help them navigate the process. That's what I would need if I was looking for a house in Ukraine. I'd need someone with local expertise. Ben, so helpful. Anything you were hoping to say in this section? We're going to have you back in a bit when we do a bit more Q&A. But anything else you want to say before we move on?
Very, very briefly, Krish, just on that sort of lobbying point, we've got a free toolkit on our website, nrla.org.uk. So if hosts feel particularly strongly about the lack of transition into the private rented sector, you can sign up as a guest. We've got a Write to Your MP tool with a few tips on there. I'd encourage everybody to use it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate you. Thanks for what you're doing. And see you back again in a minute. Now, all being well, we have someone here from the Department for Levelling Up and Communities. She's a civil servant, which means she kind of comes up with solutions. I don't know about you, but civil servants have had a pretty rough couple of days. I was watching one of the parliamentary candidates say that she wanted to cut everybody's pay, which seemed a bit harsh in the middle of a cost of living crisis. But my experience of civil servants has been fantastic. Without them, the country would fall apart, particularly as a lot of our ministers are in transition. So we're really grateful that Caroline is able to join us. Thank you very much. And you've got small children and bedtimes to do, but thank you for making time for us. We really appreciate it. Just explain a little bit about your work, Caroline, and give us a little bit of a sense of what the kind of policy is around housing, rehousing, and finding accommodation.
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Caroline Winter, and I am a Deputy Director, so a Senior Civil Servant in the Ukraine Humanitarian Task Force. And that sits across, as Krish said, Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, and the Home Office. And Lord Harrington is the Minister we report to. I'm a civil servant, so not a minister, not a politician. I think it's probably pretty obvious that I'm not here with a big announcement, because there is no way I would be allowed to say that, not Lord Harrington. So let's just be clear on that right at the beginning. I do want to say thank you. I know Lord Harrington said it, and you're probably all very fed up of getting thanked, but just to echo that, thanks again for everything that you are all doing. We know it's not easy. As Lord Harrington said, he's shortly going to be writing out to all guests and sponsors. And we know from the ONS survey that I suspect quite a lot of you have filled in recently, that a good number of and a good proportion of sponsors do want to continue supporting guests and hosting guests, but that as sponsors you've asked for two things, but perhaps not all asked the same two things, but that a lot of people want more support for sponsors, and a lot of people have said that a bit more money on the thank you payment would make a difference as well. And so we've heard both of those responses and are looking at those as things we might be able to do. I've been keeping an eye on the comments in the chat, and there's been some confusion as to whether the thank you payment stops after 6 months. As quite a few of you have rightly said, it carries on up to 12 months if you're hosting guests. I just want to be really, really clear on that. We know not everyone is going to feel comfortable extending sponsorship. It's a big thing to ask. Sharing your home with anyone is a big thing to ask, and a lot of people have given up a lot to do this. And what we need to do now, and we know that, and it's come out in all the comments, is support all of you to make this next step, which is the right one for both guests and sponsors. And everyone's individual circumstances are different. So what's right for one family and or sponsors and guests, it may not be right for another one. So there's lots of different variables here. We're looking at options for ways to help people find a new match if their original sponsors aren't able to continue sponsoring, and also how we support more people into being able to access the private rented sector, taking into account all the things that lots of you have said around the lack of rental homes. I mean, I fully appreciate that. I've just signed for a new rental property myself. The market is very difficult across a large part of the country. That we really know that. English language teaching, we know that having a good level of English is absolutely crucial to people being able to access a good job. There's quite a lot in the chat I've seen about people still working remotely in Ukraine, and whether then people can use the money they've earned outside the country to rent, and that's something we know we need to keep looking at. Whereas the tax implications for all those things. Childcare, that's a big issue. You will all know that a large number of people who've come in through this programme are women with young children. As a woman with young children, I fully understand the childcare issues and the juggle that so many of us have to do. And so looking at all those things, how we can better support all of our wonderful guests who come in to help them be more independent and as far as possible and move on. And where we can't do that, if people are happy to stay in their existing matches, how we support them, or how we help people to find rematches. There's lots going on there, and I was hopeful that I'd be here saying that we'd publish some information today, but I'm really I'm sure all of you watch gov.uk with bated breath, everyone's top website. But I'm really hopeful that over the next couple of days there'll be a bit more information on there. I'm also going to commit to getting my team to looking through all the comments in the chat. I'm not going to be able to come back on individual cases, but if we will absolutely look through everything that's in the chat. So please do put comments there, and we will pick them up. I'm also very aware that what's coming out through that is that people in different local authority areas are having very different experiences of the local authority, from everything from the level of support to how the thank you payment is flowing down. And that's really helpful. If you wanted to call out any local authorities that were particularly good or slow, then that would be helpful to name them actually. So that's sort of a very brief overview of what's going on.
That's so helpful, Caroline. And yes, there have been lots of comments. And again, with a fast developing program, again, in our lived history, there's never been anything like this. So the fact there are teething problems and discrepancies of rollout across the country, I guess, is to be understood. And it's frustrating when you're experiencing it. So thanks for your spirit. And yeah, we will email out as soon as that guidance comes. Everyone that's on this database will encourage you to be on our mailing list at Sanctuary Foundation. So we'll keep you up to date as things change. And maybe a survey would help, actually. Let's hear how it's working on the ground in different local authorities. So let's just talk it through, Caroline. So ideally, things are going really well with our Ukrainian family that we're hosting, and amazingly, they have enough English to be able to get a job. They can then go and rent a property on their own, and we're still friends, and everyone lives happily ever after. That's great when that happens. Let's say that isn't possible. Here are the other ways. We might have fallen out a little bit with our Ukrainian family, and then some of Tanya's advice comes in. It seems that Ukrainians prefer to be very direct and let's just talk these things out, and we British people don't. And we've got another session that we've done previously about overcoming some of those challenges. And then the host family might be in the situation where they can continue hosting, and we're hearing from government that can extend for another 6 months, and the thank you payments continue. And then we don't know. I guess we're kind of doing step by step. It might be the government might again come back to hosts and ask them to continue on. But we've heard both from you and from Richard Harrington, there's no moral or legal pressure to do that. We're just seeing what we can do under the circumstances. So another option is it's not possible to continue. And I guess then we're into these two different scenarios, if I'm understanding you correctly. So one is we try to find another host, another hosting situation, and you should go back to your local authority for help with that as soon as you realize that's come up. Is that right, Caroline?
So absolutely. At the moment, we've introduced a mechanism for local authorities to formally rematch Homes for Ukraine guests with new sponsors in certain circumstances. Some people on the call may have used that or been aware of it. And that's part of us continually improving our offer on sponsorship. What we are looking to do is to try and expand the eligibility of that and give people more flexibility to find their own rematches rather than it just happening through the local authority. Just to emphasise, at the moment, this is for people who have come in through the Homes for Ukraine route only. I got distracted, sorry, by seeing Eva's comment about Petersfield, which is near where I grew up. So that's very nice to see that they've been a good community.
Well, carrying on.
I was there yesterday.
Okay, and so one of the things that we're going to be involved in at Sanctuary is to encourage more people to come forward to host, because some people were really excited at the beginning and then life happened and they now might be in a situation to be able to do it again. Other people thought that everything was covered and they just don't know that there's a need. So we do need to get out and encourage more hosts to come forward. Let's say worst case scenario there is the family can't continue hosting and rematch isn't possible. What would then happen?
So, and we emphasise, we really want to avoid people falling into a situation where they need to present to the local authority as being homeless. That is what we are trying here to do. So that there's a lot of work, as you'll understand, that is obviously none of us want that to happen. So, but local authorities do have homelessness duties on them, and we know some Ukrainian guests have already come into that situation, unfortunately. What we're trying to do is then work out how we can perhaps support more people who perhaps are struggling to access the private rented sector to be able to do so. The department is a department for housing. We fully recognise the pressures on social housing, on the private rented sector, on the housing sector as a whole. So please, you know, to everyone on this call, we absolutely understand that the issues there are overall. This isn't going to be an easy situation, I think, for some people, for lots of people, and we're really going to have to work through it, and we'll need everyone's help to get through it together.
That's right. I mean, we talk a lot about 1945 being the last time something like this happened, and that I wasn't around then, but my mother told me there was this incredible sense of unity and people working together, and we're seeing that, you know, 70,000 people being hosted in people's homes, and so we're going to need more of that, aren't we? And it's everybody, you know, we're trying to work with you as the government, we're trying to work with the rental sector and business, civil society. We're all trying to do our best here, and at the heart of this is trying to keep the needs of our Ukrainian friends at the core. You know, they're the ones that have had to flee war and disaster. You know, we're seeing trauma getting worked out amongst children. Kids are being bereaved in our care because their dads are dying on the front line. So it's not an ideal situation. And so we're really sympathetic with what everybody's going through, but also very grateful for what people are able to do. And well, I think I'm going to ask Tanya a question about that moral pressure that's come up in some of the comments. Caroline, was there anything else you wanted to say from a DLUC perspective before we bring all of our guests together to do some general Q&A?
I think I wanted to emphasise some of the other points that I've just tried to pick up in the chat. Firstly, that everyone who's come through on Homes for Ukraine is entitled to apply for universal credit. If they're having problems with that, that's something that please do flag in the chat as well. Again, I can't come back on individual cases, but I know that's been difficult for some people. I also know that what we've asked an awful lot of you who are hosts to do is navigate government systems that perhaps you've never come into contact with before, so that you're learning alongside trying to support your Ukrainian guests at the same time, whether that's the benefit system or probably interacting with local councils perhaps than you would have done ever done before. And we know that's a big thing for anyone to do for the first time, let alone try and support someone else who's come in from Ukraine to do that. So there's lots of and then if guests are eligible for universal credit, they may be able to get help with paying for their housing through the housing payment, and that can absolutely be used to help pay rent to a private landlord as well as social housing. So they are just want to emphasize those couple of points. I know those are coming out. There's some really good ideas coming out in the chat. I've seen lots of things around unused housing or buying new homes or what can we build or second homes. So, you know, please do also feel free to put more ideas in. I want to emphasize that we have lots of ideas as well that we are obviously working through, but it's always good to hear from all of you because you are the ones actually living this. And this is really, really important for us. So I wanted to come here today and hear this for this seminar, so I can actually see the chats live going on. It's really helpful. So thank you very much to everyone. I know you're all fed up of being thanked, but I do want to say it again.
Well, thank you, Caroline. I appreciate it. Just before we bring everyone back, there are a few local schemes. I mean, I've seen a scheme in Oxford, for example, where it was a group of churches decided that their members came together and said, you know what, our money's not making any money in our savings account, but we could do some good with it collectively. They've collectively bought a house. You know, some people have put in 2,000, some people have put 20,000. They bought a house and they've made it available to rent to Afghan refugees. They bought a big enough house that a family of 8 could live there because they knew that would be really hard. So some people, sometimes frustration is a fantastic birthplace for creativity and innovation. I know that's true in my life. I started a fostering and adoption charity because I was frustrated there weren't enough foster carers out there. So there is a judo move if you're really, really upset about this. And you know, we shouldn't always expect government to have the answers to everything. Sometimes we can play our part. So, you know, there are innovations happening locally. If you've got a really good model, because that's the next stage, isn't it? A great idea is important, but actually doing it is another. Or you've seen a great model, we'd love to hear about it, because again, we can put things in front of government and say, here, we've got it working here. Can we scale it? Could we pilot some stuff? We're looking at some projects around what they call meanwhile or worthwhile housing. That's housing that isn't built to last for 100 years, but it's built to last for maybe 20 years, and then using that on a kind of grey site around some of ex-council property. So there are innovations out there, but they're small at the moment. But again, collectively, we have good eyes and ears. We'll be able to see stuff that we'll be able to promote to government and see what happens. So great, let's invite everybody back again. And if you've got some questions, I'm going to look particularly at the fresh questions. So if there's a question that you've heard everything and you've still got this one, just put it up, and I'll do my best to throw it to our friends and see how we go. And again, hear this. We recognise there's stuff that we need to persuade government to do, and we're doing our best on that every day. But there's also some practical things that we can do where we are. And between that, we'll hopefully find out some solutions. Let's hear. I'd love to know how buying a house as a group actually works. Whose name goes on the deeds, etc. Oh, sorry, Ruth. I just read that. I will email you because there is a project working on in a couple of areas actually, and I'll let you know how that works. Great. How about this one? Hi. Could Ukrainians apply for social houses? Oh, there you go. And how long do we need to wait? Also, is it possible if you have a job? Who's going to want to answer that? I think I've got an answer, but let's throw it to Ben. You might know more than most. Can Ukrainians apply for social housing?
Well, you may well be a very old man by the time you reach the top of the list. Is the brutal reality there? So I think that your best bet would be to use that universal credit payment and approach the private rented sector. Obviously, discuss with your local authority, but I think there's 1 million people on social housing waiting lists, and we don't have very many being built. So yeah, it's the private rented sector, I'm afraid.
I think you're exactly right, Ben. I was even talking to North Devon, which isn't that populous as an area, but they've got thousands of people waiting to be on a social housing list there. And again, for some of us, this is news. We've not been involved in housing before, and your voice speaking up to government is particularly powerful. We did an early seminar on the visa process, and the visa process was taking 5 weeks, which at one level was incredibly quick. Because if you're a Syrian, the visa process would take you 9 months. So 5 weeks was quick. But thanks to people like you speaking, graciously but strongly to MPs, it's now down to like 2 days. So, things can change. Use your voice, and let's speak up about that social housing issue, because it might have come on your radar for the first time. Great. Okay. Someone said 9 weeks. Yes, it isn't always 2 days. 2 days might have been a record, but 2 days is possible. I'm sorry, yours has taken 9 weeks. Okay. Universal credit is only 1/4 that. Oh, sorry, I can't see that. Okay. How about this one? Maybe Caroline, again, it might be out of your remit, but some people are saying that they've offered their second homes to their local council, but not heard anything back. Do you have any wisdom or advice on what someone might do under those circumstances?
I don't, I'm afraid. It would be helpful to know which councils, if anyone would like to say that in the comments, but there's something we can come back to Krish on and get out to you via email.
Yeah, I've heard other people have similar experience. I'm sympathetic with the local authorities. They're under a lot of pressure right now. They didn't get given a lot of time because we were in an emergency to work out the system of visiting houses to make sure everybody was safe. They haven't got loads more staff that have necessarily come on board in a lot of places, so it's not working as well as we want to. So maybe just offer it again, just keep going, come back. Maybe it got lost in someone's email chain, and offer it again. Tanya, a few people are asking about this kind of moral compulsion. They feel really guilty. They would love to continue offering their home, but circumstances mean it's not possible. Some people are talking about their children not being able to come and visit because there's no room in the house anymore, and that's causing kind of friction. Help us, as someone who's an expert in trauma, how can we help someone that's kind of wrestling with this?
Well, I want to emphasize again that it's absolutely natural that you feel like that, and that's what most of the people would feel, because we are human being, and that's a part that says that you are a good person, right? And so at the same time, you always have to think about your mental health as well, and try to understand what is more important for you. Yeah, to feel guilty, or to feel that you can help further to your guests. So as I told before, just sit together with them and discuss what can you do and how can you help, and start acting. As soon as you will start acting, that will really help you to feel less guilty, if you understand what I mean.
That's really helpful, Tanya. And we were talking earlier that there is actually some benefit for some of our Ukrainian friends to actually live independently in terms of trauma recovery. The opportunity to be able to lock your front door, not have to ask permission about when you use the kitchen or the bathroom, could be really good for someone's recovery, recognizing all the challenges that come with trying to find that housing. But for some, even though you feel guilty about it, it could have a positive outcome for that person. And we had a previous seminar called A Marathon, Not a Sprint. And we were talking a little bit about the guidance that people have on an aeroplane. So, you know, when you're losing air pressure, they said you're supposed to put your own mask on first before helping a child, because you're no good to someone if you pass out. And so your advice about looking after your own mental health, working out what your boundaries are, that is good. And sometimes we have to make really difficult decisions in where we want to do something, but we can't. But we have to make a difficult decision to look after ourselves. It's a really difficult balance, but thank you. Caroline, we had a very specific question earlier. I think it was from David. I think he picked up somewhere along the line. I missed it. About 50% of council tax relief for people that were using second homes to help Ukrainians. Again, it might not be your remit, but have you got any comment that you can make about that? Is that?
I have, if you'll just bear with me a second. Sorry, it was a very specific query, which Chris very kindly sent me in advance, because otherwise I would not have had a chance of being able to answer it at all. I think the query was around the 50% discount, wasn't it?
Yes.
Lord Harrington announced saying that there's a 50% discount on council tax for empty or second homes that are used to house Ukrainians on the scheme. I asked some colleagues about it, and they said that the 50% reduction is related to the Ukrainian guests paying the council tax rather than the owner paying it. So the premise is that the guests will pay the 50% discount bill, because so the tax applies to the occupants rather than the owners, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. That was very specific. Thank you for looking into that. That helps me a lot. Ben and Tanya, if you see a question that you particularly want to answer in the chat, feel free. Was there anything that caught your eye, Ben?
There was just one, just about, you know, this kind of whole feeling very, very guilty about not being able to renew. There's one lady who says that she was bereaved 1 month after taking people on, and actually she needs to kind of bring that to a close so that she can grieve properly. And dare I say it, I think, I don't think one should feel guilty. I think the lady's done an amazing thing to have been able to provide that property. It just reinforced the need for less for government policy to be less focused around goodwill and really focused around on tangible steps to make the transition more appropriate. I know Lord Harrington isn't on the call, but it just strikes me that there's a lot of people feeling hugely guilty about taking their homes back. And that to me is something that the government should feel guilty about, not those individual hosts. I don't want to make too political a point. I think I failed, but it does just reinforce the need for a proper framework for people to be able to move from one to the other with minimal faff. And lots of suggestions around, you know, deposit and month's rent in advance. Well, that seems like a really good idea to me. And having a bit more of a centralized approach, so you don't have the variation with local authorities, which is something that we said wouldn't be the best idea, because actually you don't want greater incentives in different parts of the country if you can help it. You want something that everyone's kind of got a level playing field on. So yeah, just to comment on that particular lady's post, I felt her pain very much.
Thanks, Ben. I guess there's a whole bunch of overlapping issues there. You know, as a foster parent, and I know it's different, you know, vulnerable children different from refugees, but there are some similarities, I guess, that of course you emotionally connect, and if you don't emotionally connect, you're actually depriving something important to somebody. They need your relationship, but you are not responsible for everything that takes place in your world or their world. So that balance is really hard. And actually people in all sorts of caring professions have that same challenge, whether you're a nurse, a social worker, you know, a border patrol guard and working with refugees. We all have that. We're human beings, and so we connect, and yet we're playing a kind of professional role, and so we distance. And that's a real tension, and lots of us live with it all the time. And if this is your first experience of hosting, we want to help you with that. You know, I wish there was more training available. Sanctuary Foundation, we have a course to try and help you think about, you know, pacing yourself, giving yourself, you know, the time off that you need, thinking through safeguarding issues. You know, it's a little bit like becoming a parent. You know, no one really fully trains you to do it until you're in the middle of it. But maybe when I was in the middle of it, I realized that I would have benefited from the antenatal classes I should have gone to. So it's not too late. You can come and join a Sanctuary course. It might give you some of the tools that will help you with some of the things that you're wrestling with. I think the second thing is there are some ideas here that are great, and we can offer them to government, and you know, we can be critical friend and collaborator and offering some solutions. But then there's the third level is sometimes it is about actually presenting the reality to government so that they are forced to make a change. And the fact that you guys are hosting gives you a moral authority to call for change in a different way than everybody else. So, you know, that's an incredible, powerful position to come from. And again, your MP has some responsibility to listen to you, and you can use that positive pester power to try and bring change. So there's 3 different levels I think we can work at. Tanya or Caroline, any other questions that you saw in the chat that caught your eye that you'd like to respond to?
Sorry, just having a quick look through. It's good to see lots of support for Ben and his comments. I would say the NRLA is definitely someone we're speaking to a lot, as Ben will agree. So they are definitely linked into government. For those of you worried that we're not talking to him at all.
Great, thank you.
Well, what I would like also to say, because I see people are really emotional, and as I said before, I never ever seen British people as much emotional as by discussing this issue. This is really, we all understand that it's not clear. At the same time, you have to try to divide and understand what do you have at the moment. And as I told before, you make this list and you understand what you have right away, with idea that things could be changed. As Krish told, I hope so too, as it been with visa, with some other issues. So I believe that everybody who is just here listening and came to this seminar is helping a lot, because this is a huge lots of information that I believe Krish can come, and other communities can come and push the issue towards to the government.
Thank you, Tanya. Really helpful. Ben, just a quick question from Anna about, is there a way to build a credit history in the UK for rentals? Do you have any advice for Ukrainians trying to build a credit history?
Yes, well, Rishi Sunak got caught out on that question earlier on today, didn't he? But we won't go there. I mean, the reality is actually that this is something that isn't formalised at the moment. There's lots of firms that are trying to formalise it, but there isn't anything in place at the moment. I think the way that you would gain your credit history is by being on the electoral roll, by, being registered for utilities and things like that, and then using a landlord as a reference and bank statements to demonstrate that you've made a consistent payment. That's certainly one of the areas that I know that's a focus in the leadership contest for the Tory party at the moment. But Krish, there was just one question I wanted to pick up on, if I may, and that was, where can sort of landlords go to, and where might tenants go to, particularly those on universal credit? And somebody referenced it, and I should have mentioned it earlier. It's very naughty of me because they're a great organisation, but a firm called Capital Letters that operate in London. You've probably heard of them, but essentially they're a sort of a Tinder between landlords and tenants and local authorities, specifically around universal credit and local housing allowance. And that would be a really, really good firm to speak to. The other organisation that does a similar type of thing, but more widely, is an organisation called Home Connections. Again, a really, really good organisation that does a very similar thing outside of London. A few people have sent me direct questions, but I can't multitask at the moment. But my email, ben@nrla.org.uk. I'm very happy to discuss offline for any questions. And so good to see some NRLA members commenting in the chat.
Fantastic. Okay, we're coming towards a close now. A couple of things. Firstly, I'm going to leave the YouTube channel up, and so if you've got comments that you want to make, you can carry on adding them as you like. That should continue on, and very kindly Caroline and her team have offered to look at them, so some of your brilliant ideas will kind of filter upwards. I would encourage you to that if you really want to bring change, language and tone matter. So how you speak to someone can either switch them on and open them up to your ideas or close them down. And remember, it's a human being at the other end of this communication channel. So let's be gracious and kind and firm. That's totally fine. Can I say thank you? I really want to say thank you to some people who are invisible to you, and that is Maria and Tanya, who we struggled. It wasn't their fault. We struggled with our technical side, but they persevered. So huge thank you to Maria and Tanya for providing the live translation. I don't know how they did that. It's something I wish I could do. I want to say thank you to Gareth and his team, who have been kind of managing the digital behind the scenes. They had whatever happened, they managed to solve it. So we're very grateful for that. And I really want to say huge thanks to Caroline, to Tanya, and to Ben, who have given us their evening as just volunteers. We're really gracious, really grateful for what you're able to do. And look, there is no pressure on this last comment from me. Genuinely, thank you. Even if you're planning to end being a host, you've done an amazing thing. You've helped someone escape from a war zone. And, I read a letter from a guest to a host recently that said, "My family will never forget what you have done for me, and you will be remembered by my grandchildren." I thought, that is amazing, isn't it? You think of the Kindertransport and the people that are here now making a positive difference in the UK and their grandchildren. This is amazing. So whether you're continuing on or whether you're coming to an end, thank you for stepping forward and being brave and courageous and doing it. It is a game changer. And look, I hear your frustration. Those of us that are involved in system change, whether it's in foster care or orphanages or refugees, that is the way the world is. And we are trying our best. We're with you. trying our best to try and bring change. So thanks for being part of tonight. What we're going to, in a break of tradition, normally we would have a little green room meeting, Ben, Tanya and Caroline, and I'd thank you and we'd speak together. But there's been a suggestion that we roll the Lord Harrington video again for our Ukrainian friends to hear, because we think that's quite important. So we're not going to have our little chat, but we're going to hand over to Lord Harrington. If you did catch that at the beginning, friends, feel free to sign off, but we want to make that available to our Ukrainian friends who missed that. But big thanks from me, and enjoy the rest of your evening. I've now got some more meetings because I'm in Chicago and it's only the middle of the day. But we will be having another one of these seminars soon. We will email out and ask for suggestions. We've got a back catalogue of stuff that we have done. We've done stuff on trauma. We've done stuff on work. We've done stuff on resilience. How do you keep going as a host? I'll email you links to that for those of you that are joining our seminar for the first time. But we're open to suggestions for what else we should be looking at. So thank you. Thanks very much. I appreciate everyone being here. And I'm now going to hand over again to Lord Harrington.
Well, Lord Harrington, Richard, thank you so much for joining us. Again, love your passion for helping the Ukrainian people find somewhere safe to live in the UK. On this call today, we've got lots of hosts who are excited, frustrated, challenged, a whole range of emotions. And some of them would love to hear, I guess, your heartbeat for the next phase of this incredible program, because some people are coming up to about 4 months of having hosted. What is it that you'd like to say to our hosts as they're listening in tonight?
Well, the main thing I'd like to say, Krish, is thank you very, very much. And I'm writing, in fact, you should get it this week to everyone with myself and the Ukrainian ambassador, basically to say that. We should say to ourselves as a country for people to do what has been done in the line of such tragedy. It's the least we could do, but I'm very grateful to everyone that's done it. And pleased to say the number now is in excess of 100,000 Ukrainians in total that have come over here. To our friends from Ukraine, Chris, who are, I know many of them are on the call, you're very, very welcome. All of us feel that, all of us that are involved in any way. I changed my life, as Krish knows, to do this job, which I'm proud to have had the opportunity to do it. For me, it's in my blood because 3 of my 4 grandparents came from, well, Russia and the Ukraine. And I just feel like with everybody, we can't help you as you really want us to help you, which is to defend you directly from what's happened. So we all do what we can do. And for British people who have not done this sponsorship before, we did a limited number of 600 people with the Syrian ones, Krish, which you'll remember, which was very good. But this is on a much greater scale. So thank you, everybody, and feel really welcome to our Ukrainian friends on this call, because you are.
That's so encouraging. And it is history in the making. Over 100,000 people. That's not been something that we've done as a country since 1945. So, you know, fantastic work.
Yeah,
but
it's interesting, Krish, you know, when no one was coming and the papers were full of it, you know, we were all on it and criticised. Now it's 100,000. It barely gets a mention.
I know. Well, we know. And all our guests and hosts know. So it's fantastic work. But something of that scale doesn't come without, I guess, challenges and frustrations. And one of the big worries people have are about housing beyond the 6 months. And I know, you know, it's an emergency context, it's an evacuation. But what hope can you give to some of our callers tonight as they think about life beyond hosting?
Well, first of all, the letter that we're writing to people, we're contacting people as they come up to 4 months to remind them that the initial commitment was 6 months and to ask them if they are in a position to renew. And from the surveys, etc., that we've done, the research, we think the majority of people will want to. Obviously, there's no compulsion, and certainly there's no moral or legal or contractual compulsion whatsoever. And I'm very grateful for people that have done it for 6 months, but we would ask you to extend, if possible, for another 6 months. And it's my job to make sure that the government has the financial provision with the thank you payment and supporting the local authorities, etc., to do that. But I know it's not easy. And for some people, they won't be able to do that. which we perfectly understand. And then it's our job to try and rematch people into other houses, hopefully as near as possible to where they are, where we have new hosts who will be wanting to take them in. In addition, stop me if I'm going on too much, Krish.
No, it's good. It's
friends and everyone's listening. I know it's not like a formal thing, this, but the other thing that I'm hoping is that more people, as they come into employment, will move into the private rental sector. And I've had meetings with most of the the National Landlords Association, groups like that, so I know you speak to yourself, Krish, to talk to them how to make it easier for our Ukrainian friends.
That's brilliant. We'll be digging into that a little bit later, and you'll know some of the challenges that people have when they've just arrived in the country, providing those kind of bank details and pay slips over a number of months. Are you seeing some good innovation in that space?
Well, yes, we're trying to get round the computer says no, because normally if you're just a private landlord, remember most landlords in this country have got one or two buy-to-lets. It's usually their pension or something like that. It's not like an insurance company that's got 10,000. The agent properly does credit checks. You know, have they got a bank account? Have they got employment record? Have they got this, which people from Ukraine don't have? Well, some landlords will say, well, I'm very sorry, but I can't afford to take the risk. I don't want you, not because you're Ukrainian, but because, you know, it's part of their income for their pension, etc. But I feel many, if asked, and say, well, these people haven't quite got the references because they've not been here that long, but they, you know, they got a good job or whatever. I'm sure a lot of people will be very happy to take people like that. Remember, a lot of our Ukrainian guests have got jobs and have got good jobs. It's just simply they don't have the record because they've only been here for a few months. So it's our job to try and, well, and I must say, with the support of many people, many of the professional bodies and others that represent landlords, to basically overcome this. But of course, no one can force anyone to do it. And, you know, it's a bit like people who are sponsors. Some people will and some people won't. It doesn't mean one's a goodie and one's a baddie. It's just, you know, there's different circumstances.
That's really helpful. And I think that's part of our call tonight, is to try and find innovative solutions. It would be great if some of the people that have made friends in an area, their children are in a local school, can stay where they've arrived. That isn't always going to be possible, but that would be the ideal that we'll try and make possible, because it will just help children to flourish, less another trauma they don't have to go through, having to move and then, you know, make new friends again. So I think we're all on the same page.
I'd also like to point out that we are also we are, if you like, they don't call it that these days, but advertising, if you like, to get new sponsors as well. And we should be looking particularly for them in areas where there are existing sponsors, because for the reasons that you said. I mean, when I met you in Henley quite recently, there were people, everyone there was within an area. I mean, some were in the town of Henley, but in the villages and smaller places around. And I'm sure there are other people who might not have answered the call for arms at the first instance, but might say, actually, well, I think I could do that.
I think you're right. We've been involved personally with a re-sponsoring situation, and it does seem to work very well. Again, ideally, we'll help people to get into homes of their own, but I think in the interim, that is going to be the way that things need to go forward. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Richard. We really appreciate what you're doing and just love your collaborative spirit. We're keen to make this work as best we can as civil society, churches, individuals around the country, just doing our bit. And we feel part of a team with you. So thanks for being part of this event tonight.
Absolute pleasure, Krish, and see you soon. Bye.
Amazing. Thank you.